Okay, I think we're going to start. This is a great crowd. Thank you all for braving the rain. My name is Caroline Payson. I'm the Director of Education at the Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum, and I'm thrilled that you're all here for the third event, even though it's Monday and National Design Week. Over 200, yes. Over 200 children made things out of duct tape and envelopes with Todd Oldham at our design center in Harlem on Saturday. You guys are sitting where over 350 New York City high school kids met with over 60 designers and were able to talk about their careers and aspirations. And we're thrilled that tonight we have the opportunity to take a longer look at some of our winners and hear from them. So it's the third of what we're doing this week. We will also be having our National Design Awards Gala on Wednesday night, and it's not too late to get a ticket. And on Thursday, we'll be having a public program in our Harlem Center with Adam Rebeca, which is about design and sustainability. All these events except for the gala are free. And for those of you who might know or have young children, at our Design Center in Harlem, there are free programs every day this week. Just go to cooperhewitt.org and check them out. We'd like to give a special thanks tonight to to Coalesce for sponsoring this winners panel. And we'd also like to recognize our National Design Week sponsors, Target and Fast Company.
They sponsored this.
Before we start the panel, though, we'd like just to take a moment. Many of you know that our beloved director, Bill Margaret, died last month. And we lost a director who we were all loved, and the world lost an amazing person and a design pioneer. And for those of you who have come to some of our public programs in the past, you know that when Bill got here, he started these wonderful Bill's Design Talks that were a real celebration of design and design process. So we would love for you on November 1st to join us for a night where the Bill's Design Talk will be about Bill and his design. We are in the process of finalizing the space for the event, so if you could just sort of mark down 5 o'clock in the evening on November 1st, we'd be delighted to have all of you there. I'd like to start tonight by introducing Richard Saul Wurman, who's our moderator. He's the Lifetime Achievement winner in this year's National Design Awards. And for over 50 years, he's changed the way we see information and exchange ideas. He's written, designed, and published more than 83 books, including the Access series, which redefined the way we travel. Since 1984, when he founded TED, he has continually redefined the conference experience with TEDMed, EG conferences, and just last month, the WWW conference, which celebrates improvised conversations. And I have a feeling we'll be doing a little bit of that tonight. Next, after the NDA, he'll be receiving the Gold Medal from Trinity College Dublin, an annual award that's been presented since 1780. I'm going to turn it over to Richard, and I'll be back at the end when we give out our raffle prizes. Thanks.
I didn't expect so many folks. I thought it was raining, and I didn't think there would be this many people. Well, can we put on my mic? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? I'll start again. Well, it's boring to start again. But I would, if some people are standing or in the back seats, you would help me. I don't know about the other panel members, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chairs, 7, 8. If you came down front, then I have people to look at because the lights are blinding and you like to look at a face. If you could fill in these seats, I would be appreciative. So much so that maybe I won't start talking till they're filled. Come on down front. You can always leave if I don't spit and you can always leave if you don't find it. Okay. I always sit in front. I don't know why people don't sit in front always. What is the reason that people don't sit in front? Huh? Shame? Anyway. Before we started, and I'll introduce everybody. I have their names. I don't remember everybody's name. This is a lifetime achievement, and I'm very, very old. The last, I ran TED for 18 years. The last, I don't own it anymore. And the last one I ran was in 2002. And I decided that the theme would be simply the greatest design conference that ever was. And that's what I put on the program, simply the greatest design conference that ever was. And nobody even called me on it. They didn't say how bombastic, you know. But the last session, it was the design of this, the design of humor, the design of the near future. Each session was about the design of the chair, the design of the car. And the last session was called the design of your life. And I believe, I said to the other panel members before we started that each of us, I think to a greater or lesser extent, consciously or subconsciously, have tried to accept that the big design problem is designing your life. That we make sometimes big decisions, sometimes little decisions. I mean, not wearing socks is a small decision.
No, sometimes it's a very big decision.
It could be a big decision, actually, because it sets who you are. It says something. There's different things. You changing a job, what you decide to specialize in at a certain point really affects your life. And the big thing that, I mean, my life was affected by, I have a very low tolerance. I get bored very easily. And I just could, and I'm abrasive, so I couldn't hold a job. And so I got fired into creating my own jobs. And I always had to create something to do on my own. So we'll go down the panel, and why don't you start, just tell everybody who you are and whether that resonates with you, or what were the moments? Was there a moment that you really changed what you were doing, or have you been on this one path through your whole life?
Yes, no, I'm Rebeca Méndez, and even, for example, defining what is it that I do, it is difficult now because I have been so many things, and I continue to be a graphic designer, a creative director, an artist, a filmmaker, an installation, photography, all of these things. And it's very much about getting closer every time to something that really makes me feel a complete being. And moving to this country, of course, I'm from Mexico City. It was one of the hardest things because also it was not just moving to Mexico City, but it was singing to free Cuba and to have the Communist Manifesto under my arm. And suddenly my father goes, Rebeca, you are going to the United States of America. And it was the enemy, and there was no way. But I was just too Latin to be able to say no to my father. So it was one of those things that I came to this country completely not knowing, having all the preconceptions, but not necessarily knowing what I wanted. And graphic design was a way of my being able to enter into identity. Who am I? And so identity was the key. So it was figuring out, I was doing identities for different companies and people, but at the same time I was trying to figure out my own. So I think that was one of the things, once I really started focusing on identity, just the question, who am I? It brought me into then entering into the fine art world. I did my master's in fine art because I wanted to inquire much more. How is it that identity is created? Is it a construct? Is it something that it is essential? And those questions continue to this day, propelling, because now that I find myself much more interested in how the world works, what's the nature of matter, still is the same question, who am I? So whatever field I'm in, somehow that question is consistent. And I think that as creatives, if we have one question we believe in for the rest of our lives, and we are loyal to investigate thoroughly, we have it made. We have a beautifully full life.
Janine. A week before this, I was with E.O. Wilson, and he's sort of in your field. And if I had one of the careers I didn't do, which I really I adored when I grew up, was biology. And he made an announcement at a meeting I was running that has been around a little bit, but which he says now he's proven. which he said 3 days before he gave this little talk, that in the ant colony, the queen has a little sac of male hormones in her, and that the ant colony, including all the drone ants, is one creature.
Organism.
A superorganism.
Yeah. Well, you know, don't bet against E.O. Wilson.
Okay.
He started
Why don't you tell us, give us your
sociobiology,
name and tell us what you
biophilia.
do.
He's off and on to something. He is off and on to something. I'm Janine Benyus, and I work in a field called biomimicry, which is innovation inspired by the natural world. So looking to leaves to help us make a better solar cell, for instance. And I would have denied it loudly and repeatedly if you had ever said to me that I would be sitting here with more than 2 people in the room. Because I had planned my entire life to avoid this situation. It's true. I moved to Montana. I moved to the end of a road in Montana and said, I'm going to write. And I wrote 5 natural history books. And my whole reason for being, which is still my reason for being, was to say, look at how amazing this is. Look at how amazing the Earth, how competent this place is, and look at the details and how amazing it is. But my whole plan was to sort of open up the curtain and throw the book out on stage and say, it's in there. And that is not how life turned out. And what happened was, I was sitting in my pajamas writing, happily ensconced in the life that I had planned, and completely, finally gotten there. And the phone rang one morning, and there was this very fast-talking Canadian woman. And she said to me, do you know who Jane Jacobs is? And if you guys, do most people know who Jane is? Urban design legend, you know, created she created the new urbanism herself. And years and years and years ago. But she taught me how to write, because as a college student, I read her essays to figure out how to write, because I wanted to be a science writer, and she's an amazing essayist. But I thought she was dead. And the woman on the end of the phone said, will you hold for her? I said, of course I know who Jane Jacobs is. She said, will you hold for her? And on the phone came this, in her 80s, Jane Jacobs, calling me, and she was sort of my hero in terms of how to write an honest sentence. She taught me how to write an honest sentence. And I said, Jane? And she said, Janine? And I said, I can't believe I'm talking to you. Or no, she said that. She said that to me. She said, I can't believe I'm talking to you, Janine. And I said, well, double here, which is not the most elegant sentence. Anyway, she said, would you come and speak at a conference? I'll be there. I said, no, I don't do that. More than 2 people make me nervous. And she said, come, it'll be fine. I showed up at this conference, 1,500 people in Toronto. As I walked into the airport, there were banners, Ideas That Matter conference. And she neglected to tell me, I show up at the Opera House in Toronto, that I was the keynote, the opening keynote. And I stood there trembling and just watched Jane Jacobs' moon face in the audience and spoke to her the entire time, ignored everybody else. And she was writing The Nature of Economies at that time, and she had read Biomimicry, and she was giving it out for Christmas gifts. And she basically said, get over it. Your life is changing. Now show up, take your seat. And you do not say no to Jane Jacobs, those of you who know her. And that was 14 years ago.
They're doing a documentary on her now. Do you know that?
I know. I just did my interview.
They just came and interviewed me.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
I
Yeah, it was
spent
an
a
honor.
marvelous day in Kyoto with Jane Jacobs. We were both at a conference. This is many, many years ago. This is in the 70s, back 1973. We were both at a conference, and we started talking, and we realized we both were going to go see Katsura Palace the next day. So we took off together, and we spent the whole day just together. And it was like sitting next to somebody on a long airplane flight. You really talked to them about things. It was a wonderful, wonderful day.
She's amazing. And she mentored me. She pulled me off my mountaintop.
That's going to be the second round of things I'm going to get is about mentors, because it's interesting. But let me get to you, Thom Browne. Different things, if you're the best accountant in the world, I mean the best accountant in the world, you can be about that famous. And if you're the best civil lawyer, about the same, maybe a little more. The best trial lawyer, you could be more. The best architect, more. And right up there is fashion. You have the ability, more than the rest of us, I don't care if you give keynotes or if you design furniture people sit in, or whatever you do, we're not going to be as famous as Thom Browne. I'm not going to be as famous as Thom Browne. You reach terminal fame at a certain point. No matter how well you do something, you just cap off. You know, there's nothing I can do except something nefarious and kill somebody that would make me more famous. But he'll keep on being more famous than all of us, right? How does that feel?
Great.
He can wear no socks.
And I still get made fun of every day, so just want to let that out there. Well, I don't know if that's true, but I never set out, to be the end result. But for me, it was really because I didn't study design. I was an economics major in school, and life led me to where I am. And it was
Did life lead you, or did you do a little
No, I, along with life, led me to that. But also, too, it was, I came from a very conservative family, all 7 kids. My parents were both attorneys. My brothers and sisters, I'm the only non-professional in the family. And in a way, the best thing that my parents ever told me was they were always really nurturing, but they said, you know what, we can't help you at all, but the only thing we can say is just be true to yourself and try to find out what you really like to do. And that's where I just played along, and in the late 90s, I needed a job desperately, and it happened to be in fashion, and that's where it all started. But talking about mentors, it started, and then my biggest mentor was the tailor I'm still with now, who, the most important thing for me, if I was going to do it on my own, was to do it really well, and the quality was the most important thing. And that was the one thing that we worked on together, in being able to put really provocative ideas in front of people. But it wasn't just jerry-rigging ideas together, and it was really seriously making things the right way and the best way. And I hope that's what people see in what I've done, because I had no interest in being just another designer and another person just making clothing, because that's the last thing people needed, was another person making clothing. I wanted to do something that people saw and recognized, and there was something to it that people either really loved or really hated, because I definitely didn't want to be down the middle. And so that's what I was, a stubborn Irishman, and stuck to it. And at the beginning, everybody told me, stores, everyone told me that I was doing something that wasn't gonna be relevant to what's going on. And I always knew that if I liked it, there was at least one other person that was going to matter that was going to like it. And so that's where I started. And whether or not, the whole commercial part of it and the social part of it was, that just all happens. You really can't control that. And it was never something that I sought out. And like I think a lot of us, this is not like our most comfortable, thing to do. It's,
it's my most comfortable thing
to do. Oh, it's your, yes. Well, it's not mine. I like to really stand behind my work, and I like the work to be the famous part.
I was with Todd Oldham. He was at this little meeting I did a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. And his final statement, he said, well, if you really want to become a designer, learn to sew.
Yeah.
He said, if you sew a shirt and try to put the sleeve into the rest of the shirt, you'll so screw it up, right? And you'll learn to be a designer. And I thought that was interesting. And it made me think about something I hadn't thought of ever in my life, about sewing. Yeah. Of what a fundamental thing that is, of actually sewing, thinking about sewing. Your mentor being a tailor, just that whole notion of spatial design that has to do with clothes and the body, just made me start thinking about things.
Well, because that's, you see us, but the underappreciated people in fashion are the pattern makers and the sewers. And they're some of the real geniuses that never get the credit. And some of them don't want the credit, but I always would love to push them forward. And I, especially with schools, love to make people feel how important and how just truly valued the pattern makers and the sewers are, because it is what makes it all.
The word mentor has come up a couple times, and there's been a number of, I had a mentor who was terribly important. I've had a series of mentors, been really fortunate, but the most important mentor I had was Lou Kahn, and he's being celebrated now because of the Roosevelt Memorial lot. And a number of people have written me and asked about, and it's a hot topic, mentorship, big brother kind of thing, helping out people, what do you do? And I've been thinking about what is the essence of mentoring, and I always thought it was somebody older, who is wiser, who could give you advice. And now I believe it's that I have a couple recently, one person who I've just talked to on the phone who's 33, who just did a terrific book, who I would like to mentor me, because it's really an astonishing book, sort of academic, teaches at Coral Gables University on information design. I thought it was really, really good. And I called him up on the phone and I said, would you mentor me? Because I just looked at your book. He said, I've been reading your books for, made me feel very old. But a mentor, in a sense, I think gives you permission somehow. That you don't even have to talk to a mentor, but their presence giving you permission. Do you have mentors? We're sitting in his furniture tonight. This gentleman designed the furniture, and the company that he designs for is the sponsor tonight, too.
Right, yeah.
So,
as far as mentors, yeah, absolutely. I was kind of going down the list of...
You have to introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Scott Wilson. I'm a product designer, mostly. I kind of have the ADD, get bored easy thing as well. And that's probably was driven me most of my career as well, to bounce around different jobs. I think I'm on 3 consultancies, 4 corporations, and 5 startups at this point. So I've got a very tolerant wife, and along the way, though, there's always these people that I was like, okay, I've got a table of 10 tomorrow. Like, who do I invite? Because there's so many. And but starting from my father, who was a studied architect at Syracuse, who'd noticed industrial design in the 50s. Luckily, he was there, because a lot of these kids today, they at least know about design. But
so design is in your blood, your family.
Yeah, it was in my kind of in my blood, always drawing. But I was torn. I had a high school guidance counselor who said, "Oh, you're physics and math. You should be an engineer." Art teacher, a nun who is a fantastic artist, who actually still is practicing today. She, I just recently connected with her after 20 years, but. She was like, okay, be an illustrator or a graphic designer, and like it wasn't quite the right fit. So from my father to Sister Helen David to the professor in the university that picked me out of the class and had me start working at the consultancy my sophomore year, and then I think I was working 40 hours a week by the time I was a senior, and just going in at the beginning of the semester and the end, did like basically get the grade and get the project. To all the way along the line, I jumped jobs every year and a half, not out of boredom, but I felt like I put everything into it, and I had this kind of intense kind of desire to learn more and what's next. When I hit a wall, then I would kind of, a new opportunity would present itself. It seems serendipitous in many ways, and I still don't, it was never really planned. I just followed this path that was laid out in front of me. And actually I lost my path like probably right after high school. I played baseball, I was good at art, and I was actually, my father wanted me to play baseball and do design too, but I ended up going to RIT in Rochester, New York it was Division III baseball versus Division I, so I could focus on my studies. And even there, a good thing I didn't go to Arizona State actually, because my father didn't trust me there.
I think we have to get off of baseball.
Yeah. But then I went into, but it was interesting. I ended up, I was partying way too much. I mean, I was just like out of control my freshman and sophomore year, and everybody said I was wasting my design skill and my raw talent, and I was wasting my baseball skill. And then I had a life-changing event where my mom passed away, like when I was 19, beginning of my sophomore year. And at that point, I decided I was going to be who she knew I could be. So from that point on, I wanted to be the best, and it wasn't really to be the best and get awards. It was just to be the best and utilize everything that they brought me up to be, right? So from there on, I just kept going, and things just kind of presented themselves along the way. And I've had great mentors, from even like Bob, who's a client mentor, working in the trenches from 2.5 years, 3 years on this furniture system was, learning, and I keep finding new connections. I've kind of morphed more into an entrepreneur now, so I'm actually looking at how I used to solve design problems on a singular product or system into like, how do you connect dots in, lateral industries, and how do you bring these things together from a business standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, to create new business opportunities and new ways of doing things. And I think they just keep coming. I don't plan them. I guess maybe some subconscious way they're falling into place. But and of course, it's really sad that Bill Mogridge obviously was one of the guys who was at IDEO when I was there, and he was like, when you talk about going from just kind of object design to actually this integrated systems and experience design. I mean, he was one of the leaders in that. So that was a very sad occurrence. So, and it just you never know who your mentor is going to be. We lost a kid in my studio last week from a bike accident. Got hit by a truck on his way to work. 32-year-old kid, selfless kid. It was just unbelievable. And as far as how hard he worked and how much he loved the company, but now I look at him as okay, I should have known him a lot longer and could have done great things together. But what did he come into my life for, and what am I supposed to do to carry on what he wanted to accomplish? So there's always different kind of things that you never know. You just got to keep your eyes open.
There's this funny thing about mentors that you choose them.
Yeah.
And that's a pivotal thing. There's something called social reference theory that says the fastest way to personal transformational change is to change who it is you compare yourself to. You compare yourself to, like, kid grows up comparing themselves to Donald Trump, wanting to be Donald Trump. Sorry, anyone in here? And then starts reading about Gandhi and then says, no, it's Gandhi. Huge shift. You choose your mentors. And as you were talking about it, I realized that's what biomimicry is. It's choosing nature as your mentor, right? And saying, and I remember being a kid in the natural world where I got this idea that maybe I didn't ever have to deal with people at all. I was in the natural world a lot, and I hung out constantly from dawn till dusk, till the bell rang, and I watched, and that was a world that worked. It worked really, really well. And now I am fascinated by factory tours and how our world works and how you sew and how the stuff, this is all done. I mean, designers have taught me that in my work now as a biologist at the design table. But I go to those factory tours, and I gotta tell you, I'm like, wow, this is not how nature would do it. No, and there's a mentor that I would just wish a lot more people knew.
Yeah. People ask me, like, well, what was the most inspiring thing you saw this year, like from Milan to wherever you go for these design shows? I'm like, oh, the factories, you know, the factories are way more inspiring to me. So that's where a lot of the connections happen, where you see, oh, that's a really awful way to use that material or process. I bet I could, you know, use that over here, right? And so.
You got to see how it's actually done, or actually tried doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing, is it's the biomimics that I know that learn from the natural world and say, okay, I should be able to take salt out of water as well as a mangrove does. I'll just study the root, and then I'll do it. Oh, wow. It uses solar energy to do it? Shoot! You know, I've got to use fossil fuels. The best thing you can do is try to actually emulate it, and then it shows you that's the best way to learn. Yeah. Right?
You have to. You can't learn it from behind your laptop. You have to be there, and you know, I think that's the whole do-it-yourself maker kind of culture now is really kind of getting people back to actually something that was lost for a number of years, 5 to 10 years. I think it's nice to see that coming back. And
cool, isn't it?
I think it even transitions and really crosses over into, at least for myself, and I think it's probably similar, into the people that we employ. Because I feel like people I want to be around, or there is something that I want to get from them as well as what they're going to get from me. And I always feel like all of my designers or people in sales or the people that work in the stores, I think I want to be inspired by them as much as I guess I may be inspiring to them. But I think it's almost like your whole life is full of, like you're saying, you choose your mentors. I think in a way, when you do own your own business, you almost have like a whole business full of, hopefully, because I think when they don't really inspire you, it's like I get bored so quickly, and I get bored by people too. And if they're not inspiring in some way, and I think it doesn't work.
Well, that's very much part of designing your life, is designing who you're going to be around.
Yeah.
And early on, I realized how stupid I was, that I was an ignorant person. And what I set out to do was to be around people who were really fantastic, really smarter than I was, where I could see everybody's flawed, so I wasn't looking for the perfect person. But I was always looking for some piece of a person that was astonishing. And that's not so hard to find. And that's driven me for my whole life, of finding pieces of people that are just astonishing, where you can see a pattern or a thread, if we want to use the reference to fashion, where you could see a thread that was interesting and perhaps connected to another part of the suit, really.
I remember, I'm thinking as you're talking in terms of like when I started looking for, you know, or just recognizing that I had a mentor. And I think my first mentor was Nadia Comaneci. This is something, if any of you, like, you know, follow gymnastics then, but...
I didn't think she was going to say that.
Never, not at all, just something else. And it was very interesting because I think it was following, and I became a very avid gymnast and national champion in 1979, and I was supposed to go to Moscow, and then Mexico boycotted the Olympics because the United States boycotted the, anyway, the whole story. But it was mainly to understand the body. And that, it was an incredible thing to be able to understand the capacity of one's body. And we, of course, the moment that you're practicing one move for 150 times one day, even if your hands are bleeding or your body's bleeding, there's something about that determination to follow something and to observe and to feel. So to be able to understand that the tiniest difference of atmosphere can make your move be different. And it's funny how through life that remained, because right now, one of the projects that I'm doing with Adam, my husband and my partner in a lot of the projects, is that we are following the Arctic turn that goes from the North Pole to the South Pole and back again every year,
right,
in a voyage that it is about 80,000 kilometers. And they do that year after year following the sun. So it's a creature that sees the most sun in the world. But what I'm fascinated about is through this little bird, my mentor is now the earth, like biomimicry, pretty much the magnetism, the currents, the wind. Am I able, through like following this bird, understand much more the earth's function? How is it that it behaves? So that then all actions and all what I do is in keeping with rather than against. And so it's interesting how at the first time it was a person, and I can name so many people that have been great mentors because I always have looked for a mentor. But it's funny how now my mentor is perhaps not a human, but it is the forces that govern this planet. And that is why you and I need to work together.
We're going to work together. In fact, we have to leave right now.
Yes. But it's interesting how mentorship is that which you put your attention and your intention to listen to.
The word innovation has crept into our language in a very big way. And I was driving into San Francisco a couple months ago, and there's a sign, "Welcome to the Innovation City." And next to it was a car billboard about a car being innovative, and then something else being innovative. And it's used in politics. We want to innovate. The country has to be innovative. And it largely is left, it doesn't have so much meaning for me anymore because I don't know what it really means. Is a camera on the back of a car so you can see who you run over? Is that innovation? What is innovation? Now, in product design, that must be a big word that people use.
Yeah, like you said, it's kind of lost its meaning. I think it's also kind of paralyzed companies that you work with. You know, obviously we work across a lot of different industries, but every CEO or every client will say it's got to be innovative. And the brief, I was like, well, if everything's innovative, then it doesn't really make. Yeah, so it's lost a lot of its meaning. I think those things are. I think of like those little incremental innovations are as evolution. It's just natural, like the planet, right? So I think disruptive innovation is happens, but if you always expect it, you're just going to set yourself up for failure anyway. So I think it's it's nice, and sometimes you can't plan on it. It's those stars aligning.
There must be a word in your field too about innovation. Fashion is about innovation, is it not?
Yeah, I think the problem is that people do think too much about it, as opposed to just keeping things moving forward and evolving and it being more organic, as opposed to doing this and then doing this. And I think you lose people that way. And I think just keeping it true to organically what you're feeling and how you feel you want to move forward, as opposed to what everybody else is telling you what should be done. I think it makes it more pure and understandable, and I think creates something a lot more interesting.
Now in nature, when I learned about Darwinism, it was thought of as being a very slow process, and now in the last 20 or 30 years, they say it's bumped very quickly. It's really punctuated with innovation, in a sense. So how does the word innovate affect, or is it still slow enough that it's, how does nature innovate?
What's interesting is that in the natural world, there are not organisms that have innovation as their career. Mm-hmm. Every single organism, every single generation is innovation, because one of these great things was invented called sex, which half of the ideas, think of genes as ideas, half of the ideas of the father and half of the ideas of the mother, people forget it's only half, get combined. Imagine people walking in a room and throwing half of their ideas out so that they can merge half of their ideas with someone else. So then once you reshuffle that information, you have innovation in the gene. You have all of this innovation. Now, so everybody's innovating all the time. The more important thing is what gets selected.
Yeah, filtering.
So natural selection is variation. That's the innovation part. Wild ideas. Every single organism in the population has all these new ideas happening. Variation with selection. The selection is rigorous and is consistent and always chooses that which is good for life. And it brings out of all the things the organism could be doing, all those adaptations, if an organism has an adaptation that causes it to go to the toxic wool factory and get toxic wool and bring it and make a nest, that innovation is not going to go very far. The flip side of that is the organism that does a softer, warmer, better nest is the one who's going to get chosen because its offspring is going to live. So life innovates constantly, chooses the best things to continue on, right? It replicates its successes. It integrates the unexpected, but then it keeps on pulling what is good for life. So it's almost like you don't want innovation in that criteria, right? Like you were saying, what do you really, like of all the cool ideas that you have, you've got some sort of a discerning picker, right? Mm-hmm. And you may not let anybody around you change that, right? That picker, well, that's what that's what the selection part is. Thing is that in our world right now, I would suggest that we don't have the right selection criteria yet. We're selecting things because they make a lot of money in a short term, or they're really cool, but not necessarily. We're getting there where we start to select them because the design is good, it's beautiful, and it's also good for us and for the planet in the long run. That's the selection criteria that especially I think designers need to hone that discernment, what to pick. It's more important than innovation.
And I'm thinking with regards to thought, for example, what happens following what you're saying in Henry Bergson, the philosopher, he made a very simple kind of course, all his theory around intuition concludes for me, what I can discern out of that, is the way that in the past you are, in the future you reflect and you kind of, you project what you are, but with some kind of ideas that are pretty fixed of what you should be. But what happens in the instant of becoming, the very change that we are every instant whatsoever, is innovation. But we usually don't want to exist there, but we exist in identity. And identity in both ends, projection and being, is pretty static. So innovation cannot happen when you have to have in your mind, or when you want to be, literally to be. But if you would want to constantly become, then change is your nature and is the only way. I mean, we are changing at every instant whatsoever. So how does this reflect in things that we need to make, but that they need to exist in the world? For example, even in identity, we're beginning to think of kinetic identities rather than static identities, in which one identity has many facets and it exists according to the time and the moment that you put them out. So the moment that you include change into your identity, it is much more, it's closer to that action and intuitive space of becoming. That's innovation, I think.
Well,
we can achieve it.
This is one of the more popular, well, you won't know it with the case, but this is an iPhone. This is one of the more popular products. And this is innovation by addition. That Apple didn't invent very many of the things here, but they packaged them, they put them together. And the Bauhaus was innovation by subtraction. They took things away. And sometimes innovation is by just doing the opposite. And sometimes, a lot of times, innovation is from need. And every once in a while, innovation comes from an epiphany that somebody has. Nobody asked them to have it. There was no need for it. There was no client. There wasn't maybe money to be made. But they did the Post-it note anyway. And it just comes from somebody's epiphany. Now, that's not the natural way. That's man-made innovation that comes in those patterns. And I'm fascinated with the difference between what you're talking about and what a lot of us go out every day proactively and do.
And try to solve a problem proactively,
Yeah.
rather than what happens in terms of mutation or in terms of this combination of sex. But we're finding out a lot more about how organisms learn, and in their generation decide to do something
Well, that's
new.
the quickness I'm talking about, that it's
And
not
one
so
of the
slow
things,
in
one of
thought.
the things that's really turns out to be important is imitation. Organisms will watch other organisms, and especially in higher primates, for instance, and watch and go, huh, that's a cool way of doing something. So there is this, and even in
So the beginning of
quote-unquote lower
2001 is probably true, where the ape holds
yeah,
the thing.
exactly. Yeah, imitation is, and actually it changes evolution, because females will, you know, there's a guy, Lee Allen Dugatkin, who writes about the science of this imitation factor. And he was a real nerdy kid in high school. And nobody would date him until one girl dated him, and then all girls would date him. He became dateable. And it changed his scientific career. He actually started to look at this sort of endorsement, or females imitating other females' choices. So in lecking birds, for instance, you know, these birds where the males are showing off in a lecking space and the females come by and go, I don't think so, and move on, you know. Once a female making her choice will often look at other females, and if she goes in and mates with them, it's like, huh, it's like an endorsement. That changes genes.
But Janine,
nice.
that's
Readable.
that's a subset of really
So good.
this definition of a mentor that I was giving before, of some person that gives you permission. And that giving of permission, that nod
Yeah, exactly.
of saying it's okay, whether it's a parent and just allowing you to follow the things you're interested in and saying it's okay, or another person that you observe that gives you permission to do something, or being dateable, that giving permission, that relaxation that allows you to come out is not trivial.
Biggest innovation with the iPhone, I think people forget the touch screen, all that stuff. Yeah, great. You know, they kind of
But they
refined
all
it.
existed before.
But the big innovation was the App Store, which a lot of people forget that was locked. That wasn't even.
Yeah.
But people were hacking it and opening it up and creating these apps. And I think one of the things, you know, Apple's a great refiner and a master of refinement and an imitator, because they don't always come up with it first. They just do it best. So they saw everybody doing this and they're like, okay, hold everything. We're shifting all our resources to create this app store. And that's really what changed the game. It was the phone itself, closed and locked, would have made, you know, Samsung or somebody else would have came along and, you know, equaled or bettered them on that point. But they got the world involved in the phone. So that was the real innovation there, I think.
Ecosystem.
We're supposed to take some questions. I'm not big on questions. I'll tell you that to begin with, because I think most questions are either bad questions or speeches. So with that warning, I'm not worldwide. It's okay.
Not big on
Popularity is not my long suit. But are there some good questions you would like to ask of anybody on the stage here? Think about a good question. Remember, I will take a thing, but remember the word question. half of that word is quest. Do you really have a quest? Do you understand how powerful a good question is? If you really quest something, you really want something. And half the word information is the word inform. Do you really inform somebody with the data that you're spewing out or that you read? And so think of the phrase, the quest to be informed. Get new meaning from some of the roots of some of our common words and think about them, because the simplest things in our life have a lot of power. The simplest words we don't define, we're not talking the same language. On the stage with me, this meeting I was just running was a guy who's head of the Jupiter mission. And scientists don't talk the same language. You know the elements, the chart of elements. We all know
Periodic
that.
Table, yeah.
Astrophysicists call the light elements hydrogen and helium, and all the rest are heavy elements. And that's not the way the rest of scientists think about them. They're a progression of elements, but they make that differentiation. So don't think that scientists know how to talk to each other, that different medical people know how to talk to each other, that you know how to talk to the person next to you, that when somebody says, oh, they're wealthy, you know what they're talking about. I suspect if we went around the room and asked everybody to write down what does being rich mean, a common word, you would have, there'd probably out of the 600 people, there would be 400 different answers.
Well, we have one question.
So think about the meaning of each word when you ask the question.
There's a very courageous human being.
Where? Is there somebody with their hand up?
Hi.
Okay.
Hello. Okay, so I have a question for the panel. What is your greatest failure and what did you learn from it?
Who are you asking?
The panel.
Are you asking all of us?
Yeah.
What was the second part?
What is the greatest failure and what have you learned from it? I guess it can go down to all of us. Go ahead. You want to start? That's not a bad question, actually. It's an interesting question. You can take that someplace. Or you can answer half of it.
No, I think...
Answer just the second half.
I think part of design is learning from your mistakes, and I think you make mistakes and fail all the time. So I think it's learning from those mistakes, and sometimes the mistakes create better things than what you were even thinking about doing. So I don't know. I don't have a specific answer, but I think learning from the failures that you.
Let's move right on. Go ahead.
I'm trying to think, and I have to say that perhaps my greatest failure was to care about people's judgments when I was younger. Like, I cared too much about judgment, and I felt I had nothing to say to the world. And I'm thinking, you all have something to say to the world, and your voice is valid at any time, because at where you're standing, it's a very specific and peculiar point of view, and you need to make your voice heard. And that for those, for you to think that you might not have a discipline or enough knowledge or anything is kind of silly. So if I would go back in life, I would just be able to speak my truth more freely. And perhaps that has been my greatest failure, not to speak it
Janine.
since I was 2.
That's okay. When you answer the first part, you actually answer the second part.
Yeah, probably. It's funny because my other books were about plant and animal adaptations and how organisms go into ecosystems, and so I wrote a lot about community alone. So
that's called expertise.
Right. So I think if I had to rewind, I would get other people involved sooner. The writer tends to be a loner, and as it's kind of a theme tonight, but it's true, we've got so much work to do, and things really started clicking when we got Biomimicry 3.8, the whole company together and the network together, and it's really true. more passionate people, more love is more love, and more passionate people is more effect and more impact. I would have gotten into community sooner.
Yeah. Well, you know, building on Thom's, you know, I think notion, and you know, Bill Moggridge, I think, coined the phrase, you know, fail early and often to succeed sooner. And I think, you know,
say that again louder so everybody.
Sorry, fail early and often to succeed sooner. And you know, I've kind of, from the early days at IDEO, I kind of took that to heart, and you know, I've never been really, I've failed big time. And it's you always learn and go on to the next thing. And my wife is always like, we're just learning. We got our law degree at 10 times the cost of what it would have cost me to go to school, you know, with a bad partner. So he's like there's been a long, you know, series of failures that just bounce right back and keep going, you know. And so I think, you know, I tend in a high level, I tend to trust people maybe a little bit too much, and you want to trust people, and I think that's probably my biggest weakness, that and saying no. So those are my failures. I think if you ask my wife, like, I didn't say no enough, and I trusted people too much.
I'm 77, and you'd be here all night. I continually screw up. My failures have been just massive, and yet I can't even think about them because they push me into something else that I would not have gotten into so radically. You know, my personality is a failure, yet it's been my success. I mean, with my abrasiveness, I'm charming. with things that I've made, everything has this flip-flop about it. I don't even think about it. I just know I'm going to screw up. I mean, if one gets venal about it, in 1984, Steve Jobs brought the first 3 Macintoshes you could touch to my first TED conference. I didn't buy the stock. In 1999, the Bobbsey twins, Sergey and Larry, introduced Google at my conference. I didn't buy the stock. Those are failures.
Super failures.
But they're pretty venal. My breakthrough speech in my whole life was being invited to the International Design Conference in Aspen, which was the big, great conference in its day. I mean, it's closed now, but it was a great conference. It was fantastic. It happened in, of course, Aspen, and it was the guys who you just thought were amazing came there and spoke. And I was asked in 1970, so I was 35. That was young to be asked there among the giants to give a speech in the tent in Aspen then. And I worked, I think it's the last speech I ever worked on. And it's the only one where I ever read a speech, I mean, memorized it. After that, I never did, never prepared. But that was the one I did. And it was called Hailing Failing. And it was then, when I was 35, it was about all the failures I had had up to then. And it was about each failure up to then in my life was meaningful. It was a big deal for me. And then they put me on the board because of being so open and vulnerable, I guess. And, and then I realized I shouldn't be that way at all, and I never did that kind of thing again. So, but failure, we're all failing. I mean, we're failing all the time. My mother taught me one wonderful lesson about failure. And that's about the only lesson I remember she taught me. And that was that when she pointed to a person who was in a wheelchair, and he wasn't paralyzed, but he had an accident, and he had to learn to walk again. And I never realized that you have to learn to walk again, that after you're immobilized for quite a while, you actually have to learn it. Because we don't remember learning to walk because we're too young when we start walking, but it was a learning experience. And the learning experience is that you throw your leg out in front of you and you lose your balance. You go into a moment of terror.
You're falling.
Because you're falling. You lose your balance, but you trusted it. You trust, it's a learning thing. You trust that if you lose your balance and then gain your equilibrium, and then keep on doing that, you move forward. And I thought, what an interesting metaphor for life. that if you are willing to lose your balance and fail, you can move forward. So I've always kept that image in my head of losing your balance and falling ahead. And another question. Nobody? One more? Better be good.
This question is for Janine. I heard some talk about kind of like the natural world, I guess, versus what man works on, or like learning from the natural world. And I guess, like, how do you draw the distinction? Because mankind has, in a sense, sprung up from the natural world. So maybe to put it another way, what's the difference between a termite tower and the Trump towers?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, that it's a rhetorical paper bag that I have to, like, you know, break my way out of, because I'm always talking about learning from the natural world. And of course, we are nature. We are nature. We forget. I mean,
but we are.
You know, that sort of sums it all up, that we've forgotten we are nature. But so thank you for reminding us. The difference between a termite tower and Trump Tower is they're both natural artifacts. I think the Trump Tower is absolutely natural, and I think a termite mound is absolutely natural. We're a biological being. We made the Trump Tower. Natural selection hasn't caught up with us yet, though, right? Mm-hmm. So this whole, like, hyper-dependence on fossil fuels to heat and cool it, whereas the termite mound, you know, it stays at 81 degrees Fahrenheit no matter how hot or cool it is out, using only the physics of cool mud down below, of the wind going through, of the tunnels being created to funnel that wind. The difference is that the termite doesn't have a Defense Department to protect and go get oil in the Middle East. That's seriously, I mean, you know, or you could do that on many, many, many levels. The termite has learned to build a very complex, I mean, basically the number of termites that are in a mound, a big mound that you see in Africa, it's comparable, given its size, to the population of New York City, right? And so it's not a trivial structure. It really isn't. It's just been, it's a piece of art, technology, tools for living that has been created within a context, within a realistic context. I think the termite knows full and well both the opportunities of its habitat, oh, there's some cool breezes, there's some cool mud, and the limits of its habitat. And it works like all organisms do, and we will learn to, hopefully to. It works within the limits, that creative frame. You know, it doesn't see those limits as a negative thing. It sees it as a realistic design brief. Build me a skyscraper for a population of the city of New York and do it without fossil fuels. And don't make any toxic materials. And oh, by the way, all the material has got to be made locally.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to be made locally. And at the end of its life, it has to contribute, actually contribute to the, and it does. I mean, termite mounds are always the places where there's the luscious forests because birds come to sit on the top of the termite mound and poop out seeds and all kinds of plants start, and it's really fertile down there. And so how do we get to the point where the structures here in New York City actually enhance this place and that make it better than what it was when we got here? Those are just, let me count the ways.
That would have been beautiful.
Let me count the ways. There's lots and lots of ways that it's different.
But you know, remember, any of you, I mean, you might know a little bit more about this, but the architect Saint Elia, that in Sanford Quinter's book, Architectures of Time, in which he looks at ways in which people have begun to think about the performance of building. And Saint Elia was in the, I think at the turn of the century, last century, he started to create these buildings that would actually be performative machines, and that air would be able to flow, and that they would be cooling, and everything stayed in sketches and plans and programs, but he was so involved in looking at the natural way in which things performed. And I think that the moment that we really begin to think of how is it that the design thinks and performs, we would have so much more. I mean, we already are doing it with some things, but especially buildings, I think, Thom begins to think much more in how is it that, he can make a breathable building. But, Saint Elia did it in, 1910s, 1920s. The termite mound.
Any more questions?
Exactly.
Where?
One over here for you.
Okay, go ahead. Huh?
There's one.
Is this one?
My name is Matt, and I'm 23 years old, and I recently graduated from school. I got some valuable advice, which was figure out what you really like to do, and then find someone to pay for it.
And somebody do what? I didn't hear the list.
To pay for it.
Oh, to pay for it.
To pay for it. So my question is, and this is an open question for all, is how did you figure out what you really like to do?
And who is that directed toward?
Everybody.
Open.
Why don't you, how did you figure out what you wanted to do? Or you can just pass.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I fell into, it was
I
like
think you
luck.
sort of told us.
I kind of, my father, and then school, and then, people handpicking me along the way and tapping me on the shoulder. So it just kind of fell into place.
I think we all sort of
Through working hard.
I think in a way, it's not something you just know it.
Yeah.
You just know it. You get to a point, I think life is great in how you try different things, and I think it's important to try a lot of different things and to just experience life, but I think you get to a point that it almost is so, you almost feel that it's so easy, that you almost feel like it is exactly what I should be doing.
There's something
And I
called
don't know
flow,
if you always
yeah.
need somebody to pay for it, because, I think sometimes, I don't know if I agree with that, but I think in regards to knowing what you're supposed to do, you will know it when it happens.
Or as Dr. Seuss would say, or you might not know
Or
it.
you might not, because my experience was completely
everybody
different.
doesn't figure out what they want to do, and everybody doesn't have a passion about what they want to do. Or you have 10 passions and you keep on flitting around. There's no easy answer to that question. Some of us do one thing mostly. Some of us do many things mostly. Some of us do something and then something. There's no pattern. No pattern.
My
Anyway,
experience-
that wasn't, I didn't learn from that one.
Yeah.
Next one.
Yeah.
Can I talk about
you
my,
have some- oh,
because
sorry.
it's very different, and I think I want to kind of give the other
Okay,
side
good,
of it.
sorry.
No worries. To me, it was much more like I came to the United States around when I was 10. My father took us to NASA, and I wanted to be an astronaut. And that's all I wanted to be. So I became very good at math and physics, and it was good, and I was very good at it. Comms, in Mexico, you have to specialize in your last years of school, so I studied the specialization in physics, mathematics. And then when you're really getting ready, you're darn 16 years old, and then everybody's talking you out of what the thing you choose. So I wanted to be a physicist, and my friends, no, you're gonna be with a lab coat and chasing rats and all of these things. And I'm like, but, yeah, I'm staring at a computer. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right, that sounds pretty horrible. And then, okay, then maybe mathematics. No, but you're gonna be an actuarian. That sounds horrendous. You're gonna end up being an accountant. Okay, then maybe, and this is 2 years already thinking about what's the possibility. Tortured by that. Architecture. My uncle tells me architecture, there's no money in it. It's a failed field. You're gonna not do it. But veterinarian, I cannot actually see animals dying. So it was just, I was lost as hell, like many of you might be now. And my cousin took me to the university for a new field that it was called graphic design. And it was a field that I could not be talked out of it because nobody knew it. But if somebody knew it, I would have been talked out of it. So it was one of those things that I totally fell into it. And it has no, I never thought, ooh, I'm going to be a designer. No, I just knew that the abstraction of physics, the abstraction of mathematics, the abstraction of design, it all about taking from these pool of abstract elements that you just somehow give it form, is what I still love. So I could have been a physicist, I could have been a mathematician, I could have been a designer. Now I'm an artist more than a designer, all those things. And it is mainly, you just end up loving and finding what you do, even if you just stumble through a lot of walls until you get to it. But the thing about it is that love what you do. I do think that you could do then a lot of things.
Well, I'm going to tell a little story then.
Yes.
One last story, because we've got 2 more minutes and then we're out of here. Okay, so.
You've got a baptism to attend.
When I was in high school, I was just going to be a painter. And one side of the family, my family, both sides dealt in death. One side were kosher butchers, they killed chickens. The other side of the family made cigars, that killed people. And nobody went to college, but this sort of was the ethos in the house, I should go to college. But I wanted to be a painter. So my father knew somebody at a little college who got his doctorate in testing, so they tested me. For 2 days, they tested in 11th grade could I be good at, what was I interested at. So they said I was interested in archaeology, architecture, and hairdressing. So they all had an effect on me, and I decided to do all of them. So I went to architecture school at the University of Pennsylvania, who had an archaeology department, and I took off my senior year and I mapped 1/3 of Tikal in Guatemala. So, and I really love all the Mayan things and continue to keep up on that and discovered some stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And I got an interest in cartography, which I'm still interested in. And then since that date, I've never gone to a barber.
That's the one that freaked you out the most.
That's my story.
That's a good story.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Thom and Rebeca and Janine and Scott and Richard. I know that I have all sorts of things I'll be thinking about for quite some while. That was great. Thank you. Once again, we'd like to thank Coalesce, the sponsor of tonight's winners panel. They provided